All right, everyone. Sweden is swinging to the nationalist right in mass. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. A few weeks back, we featured a video on Denmark, which I think is very applicable to what's going on in Sweden. In that video, we analyzed what scholars call a political and social paradigm shift going on in Denmark, led by the so-called far-right Danish People's Party. We're finding that even the traditionally left-wing parties in Denmark are turning towards the right when it comes to immigration and border security. In fact, the center-left Social Democrats there have already declared they're not going to form a coalition with any other leftist party. They're officially joining up with the Nationalist right coalition when it comes to Denmark's border security and very, very strict immigration policy. And so what we argued in that video was that Denmark was experiencing what we call a political paradigm shift, where a once marginal or peripheral political policy or party moves from the margins to the mainstream. It moves from the political fringe, as it were, to now becoming the consensus opinion among a population reflected in all parties. And when it comes to the border security of its nation, Denmark has rejected the globalist vision of the European Union and its open borders, and instead has shifted en masse to the nationalist populist right. Well, dear friends, reports are coming in that are showing that virtually the exact same thing is going on right now in Sweden. Reuters has a very interesting piece on how the surge in immigration-related gang violence that we, of course, all know about since it's only being reported on YouTube and alt media right. God bless Tommy Robinson. Reuters is reporting that this surge in immigration-related gang violence throughout Sweden is just fueling anti-immigration sentiments, literally just weeks before their national election in September 9th to be exact, which, of course, we will be keeping a very close eye on, so make sure you hit that bell and subscribe button. You've had, of course, dozens of murders in the capital, Stockholm. We all know that Sweden has earned the infamous title of being the rape capital of the world, where rapes have increased over 10% since Sweden became a haven for refugees and immigrants. So it's so bad that the government has actually had to launch an official investigation into the rise of reported rapes. And so this is all serving to bolster the so-called far right, the Sweden Democrats. The latest poll has come out from YouGov. It just came out the other day, and the party has increased their support from 23% a month before to an astonishing 28.5%, far outpacing the Social Democrats, who are in control now, who are polling at around 22%. And this poll complements a Sentio poll that came out just a few weeks back that had the Sweden Democrats polling at about 26% of support, while the center-left Social Democrats were only at about 20%. The combination of these polls suggests that the so-called far-right Sweden Democrats have not only begun to pull away from the other parties in the lead up to September's election, which is what we've been looking for here. They're pulling away, but not only that, they're now far and away the largest single political party in the nation. Now, to put this all in perspective, we have to understand that the long-term trend regarding the level of support for the Sweden Democrats has increased at levels that can only be called stunning. When you consider the very low levels of support that the Sweden Democrats had back in the 1980s and 90s, I mean, they were polling no more than about 2 or 3%. When you consider that, there's no question here. I mean, literally, there is no denying the fact that their growth as a political force has been nothing short of utterly stunning. They have transformed in less than a decade into one of the single most significant political forces in the Nordic nations. They first stormed into parliament back in 2010 with about 6% of the vote. They won 20 seats. They repeated their success again 4 years later in 2014 by doubling their support with 13% of the vote. And of course, if these numbers are holding, they will have doubled their support again, perhaps even possibly tripled their support if these trajectories haven't exhausted themselves yet, for a third election in a row in 2018. And given this trajectory, what do you think their support will look like in 2022? Now, this trajectory has not been lost on Sweden's other political parties, who are beginning to adopt a more of the Sweden Democrats' position on immigration. The Sweden Democrats and so-called far right in general, I think this all proves that they are the future of European politics, just like what we're seeing here in Denmark. The worried so-called mainstream rivals have begun to swing way to the right on crime and immigration to try to counter the Sweden Democrats. Again, very similar to what we're seeing in Bavaria, in Germany, where the Christian Social Union is trying to stave off the so-called far-right AfD by adopting an equally strict immigration stance. And so right now, virtually all the mainstream parties, which are becoming less and less mainstream, of course, because of this paradigm shift, they're all competing over who can set out the most restrictive immigration policies in Sweden. They're all competing on who can be more far right when it comes to the border and criminal crackdowns. Now, let's put some more of our videos together here, right? What we can't underestimate in all this is the role of Berlin. And again, to its credit, the Reuters piece recognizes just slightly. It's very perceptive here. It's minute, but remember, in an earlier video we did just from a couple weeks back, we talked about Angela Merkel's coalition basically collapsing around the whole issue of open borders and the latest round of refugees who wanted to stay in Germany, even although they were seeking asylum in other European nations. And Merkel's interior minister from Bavaria just said, no more. We cannot keep doing this and expect the German people to re-elect us, not with AfD nipping at our heels. And so even Berlin has begun to institute immigration border control measures that look more like the hardline border policies of Hungary or Austria. And remember, we said in that video that if Berlin finally falters and begins instituting Austria-inspired, Hungary-inspired border controls, the whole EU globalist experiment of open borders, it's over. It's done. It's gone. And here with Sweden, we're beginning to see the manifestations of that pattern and all the ramifications of this. Even Reuters recognizes that Swedes are looking at Berlin and saying, hey, if Berlin is beginning to crack down and tighten up on their policies on immigration, if the mecca of open borders is doing that, well, why the heck aren't we? If Angela Merkel's Germany recognizes the folly of unfettered immigration, then what's wrong with our leaders? What the heck are they doing? And so, Sweden has begun nothing less than a mass turn to the right among even their so-called mainstream parties. This was sweet. You'll like this. Remember what Trump said about Sweden, right? It's going back to a rally he held in 2017 in Florida, and he made the comments that Sweden started taking in all these immigrants, and now they're having more problems than they ever thought possible or even imaginable, right? Referring to their mass crime epidemic. And he doubled down. I'm right about that. Now, of course, the left just flipped out over this, and most especially the corporatist, globalist, secular media led by CNN, the conspiracy nut network, and the New York Slimes and the Washington Compos. He was mocked by the late night clowns Colbert and Kimmel, who have been crowned as the conscience of America by the mainstream media, all of this nonsense. You remember that, right? I mean, the Washington Compos published articles on Trump's record unpopularity in Sweden. This is back in 2017. How there really is no crime surge. And it's certainly, even if there is, it's not connected with immigrants. No study has proven that. Remember all that? Well, this Reuters article points out that as horrified as the Swedes may have been by Trump's comments back in 2017, nevertheless, an increasing number of Swedes have begun to agree with our president. Well, wouldn't you know it? I think Reuters is basically alone in admitting that among the left-wing corporatist media, which is, hey, it's a good thing. At least they're admitting it, right? After all, as the Washington Compost tells us each and every day, democracy dies in darkness. And so Sweden is experiencing nothing less than a mass paradigm shift in toto to the nationalist populist right. The center-left prime minister there, Stefan Löfven, he's actually considering sending in Sweden's military in some of the problem areas with the high immigrant population and, of course, predominantly Muslim populations. He's been touting the fact that he's cut immigration rates in half and he's taking measures to secure the border. And boy, that sounds familiar. Who does that sound like? I'll have to think about that one. Secure the border, deport, Other more mainstream parties are promising to get tougher on crime and are even beginning to advocate a form of welfare chauvinism, right? Welfare, it's a fancy term, which just means they promise to limit welfare only to Swedish citizens, excluding all asylum seekers and immigrants. Welfare chauvinism is a hallmark of the nationalist right. So there's no denying it. Sweden as a whole is going down a right-wing path, as political scientists are observing. And the key here, of course, is that Sweden is just another indicator of a mass paradigm shift going on throughout Europe. More and more, we're seeing once marginal, peripheral political policies or parties moving from their margins to the mainstream, moving from the political fringe to now becoming the consensus opinion among mass portions of the European population. And so when it comes to border security and immigration quotas and welfare and social benefit recipients, more and more nations are rejecting the globalist vision of the European Union and its open borders, and instead are shifting en masse to the nationalist populist right. We're seeing it in Eastern Europe, we're seeing it in Central Europe, Southern Europe with Italy, and now with Sweden, and of course, Denmark. There's no way around it. The sun has begun to set on the anti-cultural, corporatist, globalist vision of the EU, and a new age of nationalist, populist, and traditionalist Europe has dawned. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Click on that Patreon link below. Become a monthly supporter of this channel. Help us to continue to analyze current events in light of awesome conservative trends so that you can personally and professionally flourish. God bless.